Welcome to this video on fluid and electrolyte balance. Before we start, there are some abbreviations you should know, some basic definitions you should know. Na plus is sodium, K plus is potassium, because these abbreviations will be used throughout this chapter. HCO3 minus is bicarbonate, H plus is hydrogen ions, OH minus is hydroxide ions, CO2 is carbon dioxide, H2O is water, probably everyone knows that one, H2CO3 is carbonic acid, PCO2 is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, pH is a measure of the hydrogen ion concentration. If something is acidic, it means it has a low pH and it will donate hydrogen ions. If something is basic, it has a high pH and it will accept hydrogen ions. And if something is a buffer, it will resist changes in pH. So now let's get started with fluid and electrolyte balance. So humans are about 55% water. Males generally have more water because muscle cells have more water than fat cells. Most of our body's water is found in the intracellular fluid, or ICF, so that's inside cells, and the rest is in the interstitial fluid, which is in between cells, and the plasma, which is in the blood, which together that makes up the ECF, which stands for extracellular fluid. The solid components of our body are mainly proteins and lipids. There are some minerals and carbohydrates as well. Fluid balance is going to exist when water gains equal water losses, and hopefully that is the case. Most of our water comes from our diet, from eating and drinking. A little bit comes from metabolism. And then we lose the most water through urination, also from evaporation, both from the skin and the lungs, and some in feces. Most of our body's water is used and reabsorbed in the gastrointestinal tract. So you can see that's where most of it is absorbed, and also most of it is used there in these various digestive secretions. So really it just kind of gets recycled. The extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid are separate fluid compartments, but they are at osmotic equilibrium, meaning they have equal concentration. So generally they're both about 300 milliosmoles. The intracellular fluid has a much larger volume than the extracellular fluid, so it can prevent sudden changes in extracellular fluid concentration. So if we lose water from the extracellular fluid, as you see here, like such as somebody loses a lot of blood, or maybe vomiting or diarrhea could also cause this, water from the cells can shift over to the extracellular fluid and restore that, so that keeps their concentrations the same. Rapid water movement between the ECF and ICF is called a fluid shift, and dehydration happens when water losses are greater than water gains. So you can do this a little bit, but you can't do it all day or you'll get dehydrated. Water will move from the ICF to the ECF to maintain the osmolarity. If water loss continues, blood volume and blood pressure will drop and lead to circulatory shock and death. Mineral balance involves balancing electrolyte gains and losses, so primarily sodium and potassium we're talking about. Ions are absorbed from the diet. Some are stored in the skeleton, such as calcium or body fluids. Most ions are excreted by the kidneys. As you can see from this chart, the main extracellular cation is sodium, Water follows sodium by osmosis, so sodium and water balance are directly related. This just shows some more minerals that we have in our body. So this is important. Our sodium levels have to be balanced. If sodium concentration starts to rise, as we see here, osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus are going to be stimulated. This is going to make you thirsty. ADH is going to be secreted. This increases water reabsorption in the kidneys. And water is going to shift from the ICF to the ECF. And all of these are going to decrease the sodium concentration, bringing it back to normal. When the sodium concentrations fall, the osmoreceptors are inhibited, so you're not going to drink as much. ADH secretion decreases. Water reabsorption in the kidneys. ADH secretion decreases, which is going to decrease water reabsorption in the kidneys. This is going to cause sodium concentration to increase, bringing it back to normal. Since blood plasma is part of the extracellular fluid, as you can see here, blood plasma is made up mostly of sodium and chloride. Same with the interstitial fluid is mostly sodium and chloride. The intracellular fluid is mainly potassium and phosphate and proteins. But since blood plasma is part of the ECF, changes in the ECF volume are going to influence blood volume and therefore blood pressure. So when the ECF volume increases due to fluid or sodium gain, the blood volume increases. This is going to activate stretch receptors in the heart. Here's our stretch receptors in the heart. Natriuretic peptides are released. This is going to cause increased sodium loss in the urine, increased water loss in the urine, reduced thirst, inhibition of ADH, aldosterone, epinephrine, and norepinephrine release. And all these are going to reduce blood volume, which reduces blood pressure, and homeostasis is restored. If the ECF levels fall, this is going to decrease blood volume and blood pressure. Renin is going to be released. This activates angiotensin II. It causes angiotensin II to be secreted. Then this is going to cause aldosterone and ADH to be released. This will increase sodium reabsorption, decrease water loss in the kidneys, and increase water intake, which will increase blood volume and blood pressure and bring us back to homeostasis. Potassium is another ion that we have to keep in balance. Most of the potassium is found inside the cells. You can see in the ECF it's about 5, and inside the cells it's about 135. Potassium secretion is caused by aldosterone. Aldosterone causes sodium and potassium to be exchanged in the kidneys. But when the pH is low, this sodium-potassium exchange pump will bind hydrogen instead of potassium, and this leads to increased potassium loss in the urine and hypokalemia. And we can see hyperkalemia will interfere with the cardiac action potential and cause death. And that's actually what they put in lethal injections, is a high dose of potassium, and it makes your heart stop. So your body can get rid of potassium usually through the urine, so it's not like you're at risk of eating too much potassium and dying that way. Alright, another thing that we have to keep in balance is our acid-base balance. Tissue cells are constantly producing hydrogen ions through metabolism, and this is going to lower the blood pH. So we have buffer systems, the respiratory system, and the urinary system, all playing a role in acid-base balance, working to keep it normal. Disruptions, and these are important terms you should know, we already reviewed them. This shows how disruptions in acid-base balance can cause problems. It will disrupt the stability of plasma membranes and cause important proteins to stop working. And the nervous and cardiovascular systems are very sensitive to pH changes. That's why we have all these systems to keep our pH regulated around 7.4. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide is the most important factor affecting pH because carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid. So this is a very important equation to know. So if PCO2 rises, the CO2 combines with water to form carbonic acid, which will then dissociate into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. This is going to lower our pH, making it more acidic. If PCO2 falls, the opposite happens. It will shift the equation back the other direction and increase the pH. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide and pH are inversely related. This shows us how a buffer system works. Buffer systems generally consist of a weak acid and a weak base, and they can either accept or donate a hydrogen ion. So here's our weak acid and weak base, and if there's extra hydrogen ions, they will combine with that. This Y will combine with the hydrogen ion. If they can also get rid of this hydrogen ion if needed to release hydrogen ions. There are three major chemical buffer systems. These are the chemical buffers. They are very fast acting and they are short-term responses to changes in pH. We have the phosphate buffer system, which is important in the intracellular fluid and in urine. We have the protein buffer system, which is important both in the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid. And then the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system is most important in the extracellular fluid. Some other buffer systems, we have what's called the hemoglobin buffer system. It has an immediate impact on the pH of body fluids because there's hemoglobin in our blood, which is pretty much everywhere. There's also, this is how the protein buffer system works. Amino acids and proteins can accept hydrogen ions to prevent changes in pH. The carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system takes the hydrogen from metabolic activities and combines it with bicarbonate ions to form carbonic acid, H2CO3, which can produce water and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is released through the lungs. These chemical buffers are fast acting, but they can be overwhelmed and they're only temporary. So being overwhelmed, that means we can run out. We only have so much bicarbonate stored in our bodies. The response to metabolic acidosis and alkalosis involves both respiratory and renal mechanisms as well as buffer systems. If the hydrogen ion concentration increases, this is known as metabolic acidosis, buffers will absorb the excess hydrogen ions. Carbonic acid will be converted to water and carbon dioxide, and the breathing rate will increase to get rid of the excess carbon dioxide. The kidneys will secrete hydrogen ions and reabsorb bicarbonate. In contrast, in metabolic alkalosis, too many hydrogen ions have been removed. So in this case, the respiratory rate will decrease. That will increase the carbon dioxide and thus the carbonic acid levels. The kidneys will generate hydrogen ions and secrete bicarbonate ions. The respiratory and renal buffer systems are slower acting, but they cannot be overwhelmed and they're long lasting. They can't be overwhelmed because we can get rid of all the carbon dioxide we want. And with the kidneys, they can get rid of all the hydrogen ions they want. Last thing we need to talk about are some respiratory disorders. They can cause respiratory acidosis or alkalosis. If the respiratory system cannot eliminate all the hydrogen produced in metabolism, respiratory acidosis develops. In response to this, the breathing rate will increase, the kidneys will secrete hydrogen ions and reabsorb bicarbonate, and the buffer systems will accept hydrogen until the levels return to normal. We can also have respiratory alkalosis. In the case of respiratory alkalosis, breathing rate is decreased, and in response to this, the kidneys will generate hydrogen ions and secrete bicarbonate, and chemical buffers will release hydrogen ions until the levels return to normal. Respiratory alkalosis is very rare. Hyperventilation is really the only cause. You might hyperventilate due to shock or stress. Respiratory alkalosis is more common, respiratory acidosis is more common. This could be caused by diseases that affect the lungs and don't make the lungs work as well.